Watch where you're going and clean that up before someone slips." The voice was loud enough to carry, loud enough to turn heads at 4 nearby tables, loud enough that the hostess near the front podium looked up from her reservation book, caught the scene, and looked away again. Marcus Webb had been carrying a full tray when the man's elbow swung wide, a broad, theatrical gesture meant to punctuate whatever story he was telling, and the wine glass tipped. Not Marcus's fault. Anyone watching could see that. The glass had been the man's own, perched at the edge of the table where he'd shoved it during an earlier round of laughter, and the elbow caught it clean. Cabernet Sauvignon, nearly a full pour, spread across the white tablecloth and cascaded off the edge in a dark curtain soaking the front of Marcus's pressed uniform shirt from collar to belt. The wine was still warm. He could feel it through the cotton, spreading against his chest like a slow accusation. The man who caused it. Thick through the shoulders, a loosened tie, the particular flush of someone 3 drinks into a Tuesday evening, looked at Marcus and laughed. Not a surprised laugh, not an embarrassed one. A laugh that said, "This is exactly what you are here for." "Buddy, that's coming out of your tips," he said, and the 2 men beside him smiled into their glasses. Marcus did not move. He did not raise his voice. He set the tray down on the service stand with both hands, straightened, and reached for the folded linen at his waist. He blotted the tablecloth in silence, pressing the cloth against the spreading stain with the same steady, deliberate pressure his grandmother had used at her sewing table. Heel of the hand, even weight, no hurry. He said nothing. The crowd in Aurelius, one of the most expensive restaurants in Atlanta, watched for a moment, decided there was nothing more to see, and returned to their meals. What none of them knew was who Marcus Webb actually was. Not the man in the stained shirt, not the waiter absorbing a drunk lawyer's contempt on a Tuesday night. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail is here for a reason. Because when the truth came out, it didn't just embarrass the man with the loosened tie. It ended something he had spent 15 years building. And it began something he never saw coming. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you who Marcus Webb really was, and why the wine on his shirt was the least remarkable thing that happened in that restaurant that night. He had grown up in the West End neighborhood of Atlanta, in a narrow house on a street where the gutters filled with red Georgia clay every time it rained. His grandmother, Estelle Webb, had kept that house for 41 years. She worked as a seamstress out of the back room, and she had a saying she repeated so often that Marcus could hear it in her voice even now, decades later, even standing in a wine-soaked shirt in the middle of a fine dining room. "Stay low," she would say, pressing a seam flat with the heel of her hand. "Build high. The ones who need the world to see them coming never get where they're going." He had been 11 years old the first time she said it. He was 37 now. He had never forgotten it. Marcus had put himself through Georgia State on Pell Grants and weekend shifts at a hotel banquet kitchen, where he learned to carry 6 plates on one arm and read a dining room the way a chess player reads a board. Not the piece in front of him, but the 3 moves behind it. He graduated with a degree in hospitality management and a minor in business administration. He spent 3 years managing the floor at a mid-tier chain in Buckhead, learning every system, every supplier relationship, every line on a profit and loss statement. Then 4 more years as assistant general manager at a boutique hotel in Midtown, where he quietly built a reputation among vendors and investors as someone whose word was worth more than a contract. He moved in silence. He built in silence. What the people at Aurelius did not know What the man with the loosened tie had no idea about was that Marcus Webb did not work at Aurelius. He owned it. Not as a silent partner, not as a minority stakeholder brought in for optics. He was the majority owner and founding operator, a fact not advertised on the menu or the website, because Marcus had made a deliberate choice when he opened the restaurant 4 years ago. He wanted to know what his staff experienced. He wanted to understand the floor from the floor, so 2 nights a week he put on a uniform and worked a section, and he had done it every week since the doors opened. His general manager, Priya Anand, was the only staff member who knew. His investors knew. His attorney knew. No one else did. He had built Aurelius from a shuttered event space on Peachtree Street, negotiated every lease clause himself, personally selected every piece of furniture and every wine on the list. He had argued with the architect over the acoustic panels in the ceiling, the ones that kept the room warm and intimate without deadening it, and he had been right. The restaurant had received a James Beard nomination in its 2nd year. It had been profiled in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and in Food and Wine magazine. It had a 3-month waiting list for weekend reservations. The man who had just laughed at him was sitting at table 7 on a Tuesday evening because someone had called in a favor to get that reservation. Marcus had approved the reservation himself. He did not think about any of this as he finished blotting the tablecloth. He thought about the seam his grandmother used to press flat. He kept his breathing even. He asked if the gentleman would like another round. The man with the loosened tie, his name was Derek Calloway, a partner at the litigation firm of Calloway, Briggs, and Marsh, looked at Marcus with the particular expression of someone who has never once considered that a waiter might be anything other than a waiter. "Yeah," Derek said, "and try not to spill it this time." The 2 men beside him laughed again. Marcus nodded once, picked up the tray, and walked back toward the service corridor. And it was about to get worse. Derek Calloway had come to Aurelius that night for a reason that had nothing to do with the food. He was celebrating. His firm had just secured a 7-figure settlement in a commercial real estate dispute, the kind of number that entitled a man to a loosened tie and a $400 bottle of wine on a Tuesday. He had been a litigator for 15 years, the kind whose name appeared in business journals next to words like aggressive and results-oriented. He was 44 years old, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he considered his equal. Derek Calloway did not consider many people his equals. He had grown up in Alpharetta, attended Emory Law, and joined his father's firm at 28. The firm bore his name first on the letterhead. He drove a silver Mercedes S-Class and kept a membership at a private club in Buckhead where the waitstaff also wore pressed white shirts. He had never once, in 15 years of dining at places like Aurelius, wondered who owned the room he was sitting in. Ownership, in his experience, looked a certain way. It wore a certain kind of suit. It sat at a certain kind of table. It did not carry a tray. This was the engine of his certainty. Not malice, exactly, though what he had done to Marcus Webb carried the full weight of contempt. It was something more corrosive than malice. It was assumption. The assumption, so deep it had never been examined, never been tested, never once been wrong in his experience, because the world he moved through had been arranged, carefully and over many years, to confirm it at every turn. He did not know that the restaurant around him, the lighting he admired, the wine list he ordered from without looking at the prices, the kitchen whose food he praised loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear, all of it belonged to the man he had just told to clean up. He did not know that yet. At the far end of the dining room, at a corner table near the window looking out onto Peachtree Street, a man named Raymond Ossie had watched the entire exchange without moving. Raymond was a managing partner at a venture capital firm called Meridian Capital Group, and he had been at Aurelius that evening for a quiet dinner alone, the kind a man takes when he needs to think without interruption. He had a glass of Burgundy in front of him and a manila folder beside his plate that he had not opened in 20 minutes because he had been watching Table 7. Raymond was 41 years old. He had grown up in Decatur, and he had spent enough of his career in enough rooms to recognize exactly what he had just witnessed. He had seen it before. He had felt it before. The particular performance of a man who believes the person serving him exists in a separate category of human being, a category that does not require courtesy or restraint. He watched Marcus walk back to the service corridor with the empty tray and the wine-soaked shirt and the absolute stillness of someone who had decided, a long time ago, how they were going to carry themselves in moments like this one. Raymond reached into his breast pocket and set a business card on the edge of his table. He did not move it yet. He had learned, over a long career, that patience was not passivity. It was preparation. The dining room hummed around him, silverware on porcelain. The low murmur of conversations threatened beneath the soft pull of the ventilation system. Derek Calloway's voice, still carrying from Table 7, still performing for his colleagues. The sound of a man who had never once doubted that the room belonged to him. Raymond Osei picked up his wine glass and waited. Marcus Webb returned to Table 7 with a fresh bottle of Cabernet, a 2019 Napa Valley Reserve that retailed on the Aurelius list for $380. He opened it with the practiced economy of someone who had done it 10,000 times, poured a taste for Derek without being asked, and waited. Derek swirled it, drank it, did not look up. "It'll do," he said. Marcus poured for the table and stepped back. He had 6 tables in his section. 3 of them were having excellent evenings. A couple celebrating an anniversary, a group of 4 women marking a birthday, a solo diner at the corner table near the window who had barely touched his food but kept watching the room with the quiet attention of someone taking inventory. Marcus had noticed the solo diner. He noticed most things. He had also noticed that his floor manager, a young man named Darius Cole, was watching him with an expression caught between concern and something closer to anger. Darius was 26 and had been at Aurelius for 2 years. He was the best floor manager Marcus had ever trained, precise with the kitchen tickets, instinctive with the tables, the kind of young man who remembered a guest's water preference from a visit 3 months prior. He was also the only staff member, besides Priya, who had begun to suspect, not know, but suspect, that Marcus's relationship to the restaurant was not quite what it appeared to be. "You good?" Darius said quietly. "Fine," Marcus said. Darius looked at the stain on Marcus's shirt. That man did that on purpose. "His elbow bow did it," Marcus said. "He didn't think about me enough to do it on purpose." Darius was quiet for a moment, then, "I can take that table." Marcus looked at him. "I have it." There was something in the way he said it. Not a reprimand, not a dismissal, but a weight, a finality, that made Darius step back. He had heard that tone before. He didn't fully understand it, but he respected it. Marcus straightened his collar, tucked the linen back at his waist, and walked back out onto the floor. He moved through the dining room the way he always moved, with the unhurried precision of someone who knew every inch of the space, because he had designed every inch of it. He knew which floorboard near table 4 had a slight give. He knew the way the candlelight on the east wall softened in the second hour of service. He knew all of it the way a man knows the house he built himself. Derek Calloway did not notice any of this. Derek was now on his fourth glass of wine, deep into a story his colleagues apparently found hilarious, gesturing widely. His tie had come further undone. He had pushed his chair back at an angle that partially blocked the aisle. When Marcus came to clear the appetizer plates, Derek did not move the chair. Marcus reached across it carefully without asking him to move, angling his body with the practiced patience of someone who has learned not to make a scene of another man's carelessness. Derek glanced up. "You got a problem?" "No, sir," Marcus said. "Because you keep hovering. I'm clearing the table, sir." Derek looked at him with the flat, assessing expression of someone deciding whether a situation requires more of his attention. He decided it did not. He turned back to his colleagues. "These places," he said, not lowering his voice, "hire anybody." The table laughed. The couple at the anniversary table, 2 feet away, did not. The woman looked at her husband. Her husband looked at his plate. Marcus finished clearing. He did not pause. He did not accelerate. He moved at exactly the same pace he had been moving all evening, carried the plates back to the service corridor, set them down, and stood for exactly 4 seconds with his hands flat on the stainless steel counter, looking at nothing. The metal was cool under his palms. The kitchen noise moved around him. The hiss of the flat top, the call and answer of the line cooks, the clean percussion of a sauté pan set down hard. He heard all of it and none of it. 4 seconds. Then he went back to work. At the corner table, Raymond Osei had set down his wine glass. He was no longer pretending to read the folder. He had watched the chair. He had heard the comment. He had seen the couple at the anniversary table react, and he had seen the husband look away. He picked up the business card. He held it between 2 fingers. He was waiting for the right moment, not knowing that the right moment was already in motion, set in motion by a man who had decided a long time ago that the way you respond to contempt is not with anger, not with revenge, but with something quieter and more durable. With evidence. The moment Derek Calloway said, "These places hire anybody," the dining room shifted in a way that most people present could not name, but all of them felt. It was not a sound. It was the absence of one. A half-second in which forks hovered and conversations compressed, and the ambient warmth of the room contracted around a single table. Then it expanded again, and people returned to their meals, and the moment was absorbed into the evening, the way such moments always are in rooms where no one wants to be the person who says something. That was the architecture of it. That was how it worked. Not with a shout, not with a scene, with a silence that lasted half a second, and then with the decision, made by every person in that room, to let it pass. Marcus Webb let it pass too, but not for the same reason. He had learned something in 4 years of working his own floor. The room itself was a kind of instrument. It registered everything, even when the people inside it pretended otherwise. The couple at the anniversary table had heard Derek's comment. The woman had looked at her husband with an expression Marcus recognized from his grandmother's face, the particular compression of the lips that means "I know what I just heard." The husband had looked at his plate, but he had not looked comfortable doing it. Marcus filed that. He filed everything. He was back at the service corridor now, standing beside Darius Cole, who was holding a printed ticket and not looking at it. "He said that out loud," Darius said. It was not a question. "He did," Marcus said. Darius set the ticket down on the steel shelf with a deliberateness that was itself a kind of statement. He had worked in restaurants since he was 16, long enough to have developed a particular sensitivity to the sound of contempt dressed as humor. He had heard it before. He had absorbed it before. He had done what the industry required him to do with it, which was nothing. Tonight, something in him was resisting that requirement. "I'm going to take that table," he said. "Tell them I'm their server now." Marcus looked at him. "No." "Marcus, no." Same weight, same absence of anger. "I have the table, I have the floor, you have the kitchen tickets, stay on the kitchen tickets." Darius looked at him for a long moment. He wanted to say something more. Not an argument, exactly, but the question he had been carrying for 2 years, the one he had never quite found the angle to ask. Why does this man work a section? Why does he move through this dining room like he owns it, and then carry plates like he doesn't? Why does he know where every piece of furniture came from? He didn't ask it. He picked up the kitchen tickets, but he kept watching. Derek Calloway was now on his 5th glass of wine. He had flagged Marcus down from across the room with a single raised hand and a snap of the fingers, the gesture of a man who does not consider that the person he is flagging might be in the middle of something else. Marcus was at the anniversary table, describing the pastry chef's dessert selection. A dark chocolate tart with cardamom cream, a Meyer lemon panna cotta that had been on the menu since opening night, when the snap reached him. He finished the description. He told the couple he would bring the dessert menu momentarily. Then he walked to table 7. "Another bottle," Derek said, not looking up from his phone. "Of course. Same label?" Derek looked up. His eyes moved to the stain on Marcus's shirt, and something crossed his face. Not guilt, nothing close to guilt, but a renewed amusement, as though the stain were a joke that kept paying dividends. "Get us something better," Derek said. "Something you'd actually know about." He glanced at his colleagues. "If that's possible." Marcus said, "I can recommend the 2017 Dalla Valle Maya. It's a Bordeaux blend from Napa, one of the finest bottles on the list." Derek looked at him for a moment. Then, "You know what a Bordeaux blend is?" 7 words, delivered with the patient incredulity of a man who has never had to question his own expertise in the presence of someone he considers beneath him. Marcus held his gaze for exactly 1 second. "I do," he said. 2 words. Total. Derek made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, and waved his hand. "Fine, bring it." Marcus pulled the bottle himself from the reserve section of the cellar that only he and Priya had keys to. He checked the temperature. He brought it to the table, opened it with the same economy of motion he brought to everything, and decanted it without being asked, because the wine required it, and because he knew every bottle on the list required or did not require it, because he had personally selected everyone. He set the decanter on the table and let it breathe. He watched the wine settle into the glass vessel, dark and still, patient as everything he had ever built. Derek watched the decanting with an expression that had shifted slightly from amusement to something more uncertain. He accepted the first pour. He drank it. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's actually good." He said it to his colleagues, not to Marcus. Marcus nodded and stepped back. At the corner table, Raymond Osei set down the business card. He had made a decision. He waited until Marcus passed near his table, then said quietly, "Excuse me." Marcus stopped. He turned. He looked at Raymond with the same professional attention he brought to every table. Raymond held out the card. "I'd like to leave this for the owner, or whoever handles business relationships here." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. A small recalibration, the look of a man who has just noticed something he was not expecting. Marcus took the card. He looked at it. Raymond Osei, Meridian Capital Group, managing partner. He looked up. Raymond met his eyes and said nothing more. But the look on his face was not the look of a man who has handed a business card to a waiter. It was the look of a man who is not entirely sure he has done that. Marcus said, "I'll make sure it reaches the right person." He said it with a gravity that Raymond Osei, who had spent 20 years reading rooms, felt in the center of his chest. Marcus tucked the card into the breast pocket of his wine-stained shirt and walked back to the service corridor. Raymond watched him go. He turned the wine glass slowly in his hand, the burgundy catching the candlelight in a thin red crescent at the rim. He was beginning to understand something. He was not yet certain what it was, but he was beginning to understand it. Derek had been on his phone for the last 20 minutes of the meal, and now he looked up with the focused posture of someone who had just finished delivering a verdict on a restaurant review platform. He set the phone down. He looked at Marcus. "You know what your problem is," he said. Marcus set down the dessert plates he was clearing. He straightened. He said nothing. "Your problem," Derek said, "is attitude. I've been in 100 restaurants better than this one, and I've never had a server make me feel like I was the problem." He gestured around the dining room, the warm light, the acoustic ceiling, the room that Marcus had argued into existence clause by clause and decision by decision. "This whole place has an attitude, like we should be grateful to be here." The older man with the silver temples, his name was Paul Briggs, partner at Callaway, Briggs & Marsh for 11 years, said quietly, "Derek." Derek ignored him. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said to Marcus. "This place isn't as good as it thinks it is, and neither are you." The dining room was not silent, but it was close. The couple at the anniversary table had stopped talking. The group of 4 women had lowered their voices. Raymond Osei had set down his glass. Marcus stood at the edge of table 7 with the dessert plates in his hands and the wine stain on his shirt and the business card in his breast pocket, and he looked at Derek Callaway with an expression that was not anger, and was not hurt, and was not the performance of patience. It was something older than all of those things. The expression of a man who has heard this before, in different rooms, from different mouths, and who has spent 37 years deciding, over and over again, what to do with it. He set the plates on the service stand. He said, "I appreciate the feedback, sir." 6 words. He walked back to the service corridor. Paul Briggs watched him go. He set his napkin on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something down that he does not intend to pick back up. He looked at Derek with an expression that was not amusement and was not neutrality. It was the beginning of a decision. The reckoning did not arrive with noise. It did not arrive with a confrontation or a raised voice or a dramatic gesture. It arrived the way Marcus Webb had always built things, quietly and from a direction no one was watching. Paul Briggs had been making his decision in pieces across the length of the evening, across the spilled wine and the snap of fingers and the chair that blocked the aisle and the comment about hiring anybody. Each piece had settled into him with the weight of a man who has spent 11 years telling himself that Derek's edges were a professional liability but not his problem. Tonight the argument had finally found him. He excused himself from the table at 9:47. He told Derek he was going to the men's room. He walked past it. He walked to the front of the restaurant where the hostess stand was, and asked the young woman there, a woman named Camille, who had been at Aurelia since the 2nd month of its operation, whether he could speak with the manager. Camille looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the small radio at the stand and said quietly, "Priya, can you come to the front?" Priya Anand arrived from the back of the house in under 2 minutes. She was 34 years old, with the composed, unhurried authority of someone who has run a difficult operation long enough to know that urgency and panic are different things. She moved through the dining room the way Marcus moved through it, with the particular ownership of someone who knows every square foot. Paul Briggs introduced himself. He said he was a partner at the firm at Table 7. He said he wanted to apologize on behalf of his colleague. He said the behavior at that table had been unacceptable and that he intended to address it internally and formally, not simply as a courtesy. Priya listened with the careful attention of someone who knows how to distinguish the apologies that mean something from the ones that don't. Then she said, "I appreciate that. I'll let the owner know." Paul Briggs paused. "The owner?" "Yes," Priya said. "He's on the floor tonight." The silence that followed was brief, but it was the kind of brief silence that contains a great deal. Paul Briggs looked at Priya. He looked at the dining room. He said, "The man in the—" "Yes," Priya said. He stood with that for a moment. Then he said, "I see." He said it the way a man says something when he has just understood that a situation is considerably larger than he thought it was. He walked back to Table 7. He sat down. He looked at Derek, who was still on his phone, still composed in the loose certainty of a man who has not yet been told anything that would disturb it. Paul Briggs said, "Derek, we need to go." Derek looked up. "We haven't gotten the check." "I'll handle the check. We need to go." Derek looked at him with the mild irritation of someone whose evening is being managed without his consent. "What's the problem?" Paul Briggs said, "The man you've been talking to all evening." He paused, choosing his words with the precision of a litigator who understands that the words you choose in a moment like this will be the words that are repeated. "He owns this restaurant." The silence at Table 7 was total. The younger associate looked up from his phone. Derek did not move. His expression went through a sequence. First a kind of blankness, then a recalibration, then something that was not quite shame and not quite fear but contained elements of both. He said, "That's not—" "It is," Paul said. Derek looked across the dining room. Marcus was at the anniversary table, presenting the final dessert course, moving with the same unhurried precision he had moved with all evening. He was not looking at Table 7. He did not look up. Derek Calloway sat in the chair he had pushed back at an angle that blocked the aisle. In the restaurant he had spent the evening dismissing, and he understood, in the particular clarifying way that understanding arrives when it is too late to be useful, that the man he had told to clean up, the man he had snapped his fingers at, the man he had told that the restaurant wasn't as good as it thought it was, had been the owner of the room the entire time. He said nothing. Paul Briggs settled the check without looking at the total and left a gratuity larger than the bill. He asked Camille to make sure it reached the right person. Camille said she would. She folded the receipt carefully and set it in the drawer beneath the stand. And she meant every word. They left. Derek walked out of Aurelius without speaking, his tie fully undone, his shoulders carrying the particular set of a man who has not yet decided what to do with what he knows. The younger associate followed. Paul Briggs paused at the door, turned back once, looked at the warm light and the quiet tables and the man in the wine-stained shirt now standing at the service corridor talking to Darius Cole, and then he walked out into the Atlanta night. What happened after that was not immediate. It rarely is. But it was thorough. Paul Briggs did not go home and forget what he had seen. He went home and sat in his study for a long time, thinking about 11 years of decisions he had made about Derek Calloway. The billing gate arrangements, the letterhead, the smile he had offered when it cost him nothing to offer it. He sat with all of it in the particular silence of a man who is deciding whether he is going to be the person he has always told himself he was. In the morning, he called the firm's managing partner. He did not characterize what had happened as a personal dispute. He characterized it as a professional liability. He used the word unacceptable, and he used several others. He said that Derek's conduct in a public setting toward a black business owner had created an exposure the firm could not absorb. He said it clearly, and he said it once. The managing partner had been practicing law for 30 years. He understood exposure. He understood that the story of a partner at a named firm publicly humiliating the owner of a James Beard-nominated restaurant in front of witnesses, in front of a venture capital managing partner sitting 12 feet away, was not a story that stayed in the restaurant. It did not stay in the restaurant. Raymond Osei had not gone home and forgotten what he had seen either. He had gone home and written an email. He sent it to 3 people. One was a journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who covered the city's business community. One was a colleague at Meridian Capital Group. One was Marcus Webb, whose contact information he had found through the Restaurants and Corporation filings, public record, listing Marcus Webb as majority owner and founding operator of Aurelius Hospitality, LLC. He wrote to Marcus, "I was at your restaurant last night. I watched what happened. I want to have a conversation when you're ready." Marcus read the email at 6 in the morning, standing in the kitchen of the narrow house on the West End street where his grandmother had lived for 41 years. He had inherited the house when Estelle Webb died. He had not sold it. He had kept it the way she left it, the sewing machine in the back room, the garden in the yard, the particular smell of the kitchen in the early morning, coffee and old wood and something green from the yard that came through the window screen, and he came here when he needed to think. He read the email twice. He set his phone face down on the kitchen table. He looked out the window at the garden, where the collard greens his grandmother had planted were still growing, tended now by a neighbor named Gloria who had been Estelle's closest friend and who refused to let the garden go. He thought about what his grandmother used to say, "Stay low, build high." He picked up his phone and wrote back. He said, "I'm ready." Derek Calloway resigned from Calloway, Briggs and Marsh 6 weeks later. The firm's statement said it was a mutual decision. It was not. His name came off the letterhead. The firm became Briggs and Marsh, and they issued a statement about their commitment to professional conduct that was careful and specific in ways that anyone who had read the Journal-Constitution piece would understand. The Journal-Constitution piece ran on a Thursday. It was not a hit piece. It was a profile of Marcus Webb, of Aurelius, of the West End, of the James Beard nomination, and the 3-month waiting list, and the owner who worked the floor 2 nights a week because he believed that the only way to understand what your people experience is to experience it yourself. The incident at Table 7 was a single paragraph, rendered without embellishment. The facts were sufficient. It was enough. Darius Cole was promoted to assistant general manager 3 months after that evening. Marcus told him on a Tuesday before the dinner service, in the service corridor where Darius had set down the kitchen tickets and watched and waited. Darius stood very still when Marcus told him. He said, "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said yes. Darius said, "Did you know all along how it was going to go?" Marcus looked at him for a moment. He said, "I knew how I was going to go. That's all you ever know." Raymond Osei's conversation with Marcus became a meeting. The meeting became a term sheet. Meridian Capital Group invested in the expansion of Aurelius Hospitality, LLC, a second location in the West End, 2 blocks from the narrow house on the red clay street where Marcus had grown up. The second location opened 14 months after that Tuesday evening. Marcus worked the floor on the first night. He wore a pressed white shirt. He did not advertise that he owned it. Now, here is what I want you to hold on to when you walk away from this story. Marcus Webb never raised his voice. He never broke his composure. He never gave Derek Calloway the confrontation that Derek Calloway, on some level, was performing for. He absorbed the contempt the way his grandmother had pressed a seam, with the heel of his hand, with steady pressure, with the knowledge that the work would hold. He let the room be a witness. He let the evidence accumulate. He let the reckoning come in its own time, through its own channels, earned by restraint rather than delivered by anger. And the reckoning came. It always does, when the foundation is built the right way. What strikes me, every time I think about this story, is not the reveal. It is not the moment Paul Briggs sat down and said we need to go. It is the 4 seconds Marcus spent with his hands flat on the stainless steel counter, looking at nothing, after Derek Calloway said these places hire anybody. 4 seconds, the kitchen noise moving around him, the cool metal under his palms. Then he went back to work. That is the whole story in 4 seconds. Because this happens every day. Not in Aurelius, not in Atlanta, not with a James Beard nomination as the hidden fact. It happens in offices and parking lots and hospital corridors and courtrooms. It happens to people who have built extraordinary things in silence, who carry credentials the room cannot see, who are dismissed before the sentence is finished. And it happens to people who have built nothing extraordinary at all. People who deserve basic courtesy simply because they are human, and who do not receive it, and who absorb it with a stillness that costs them something no one ever acknowledges. The question worth sitting with is this: how many people like Marcus Webb have you walked past, or dismissed, or failed to see? Not because you are Derek Calloway, but because the world arranged itself to make not seeing easy. Drop a comment. I want to hear your answer, and if these are the stories you want to keep finding, the people the world overlooked, the worth that was built in silence, then stay with this channel because we find them every week.